Yo, what's going on, E7 fam? Pat here, back to do a video for the custom group summons for November 2023. Kinda quickly give you a brief overview, what I think the best choices are. Some of you may be asking though, hold on, didn't we just do a 5-star selector tier list last week? That's true, but what makes custom group summon a little bit different is that 1, you have access to limited characters, as you can see here, limited summons, and 2, each character is accompanied by a featured artifact. So in the case of my girl Luna here, it would be Draco Plate. And that's super important. And the best way to illustrate that is with the character Cerise. Cerise is a limited character. You might not actually have access to this character, so obviously I can't recommend her in the selector video. But as a character, she's pretty low tier in my opinion, and definitely needs some balance adjustment. Still worth having in case there is a piece of content that you'd want to use her in, such as like Advent or Expedition. But our accompanying artifact is Guiding Light, which is pretty much the sole thing that is propping up most of the Ranger class in Epic 7 in 2023. So if you want to play a Ranger, you probably need Guiding Light, which means that if you don't have it, you pretty much have to get it. And so that's why I think it was worth revisiting this real quick and just kind of giving you a different tier list specifically for this one, not necessarily the selector. All right, now let's take a quick look over at my tier list here. My first tier is goated artifacts. These are just game-changing artifacts that you're going to want to have multiple copies of. Intermediate and veteran players who have most of the cast, this is where you're going to be focusing most of your efforts on. For those of you who are newer that don't have access to the entire roster, I recommend choosing the characters that are lower on the list. Start with the limited heroes because you just can't get them at any time of the year. So you might as well pick them up now, even if I don't think they are particularly great for some of them, namely like Seaside Bologna. Still worth having them. You never know when you're going to need that character for a piece of PvE content or they get buffed or reworked. So let's start with goated artifacts. First up is Abigail. This is my number one choice for every single veteran or intermediate player here. Abigail's accompanying artifact is Golden Rose, which is basically the best warrior artifact that we've gotten in a very long time. It might be the best one in the game right now. There's at least like a dozen or so characters, I feel like, where the thing is best in slot or very close to best in slot, and they all want it plus 30, and even if you're a whale, there's no way you have enough copies of Golden Rose to actually make it work on every single character. So yeah, Abigail is, again, just, I think, the slam dunk pickup for almost everybody that's watching that has most of the roster. Basar is next up because his accompanying artifact is Abyssal Crown, which I still think is a crazy underplayed, very powerful PvP artifact, and it's super useful in a lot of strategies for Abyss. So I definitely think it's one that you're going to want to have at a very high investment level. Cerise we've already talked about. Accompanying artifact is Guiding Light. Pretty much the best Ranger artifact in the game. Can never have enough of them. I have 5 personally, and I still don't think it's enough. Charlotte is next up. Accompanying artifact is Elbrus Ritual Sword. Like Guiding Light, can never have enough. I have 2 maxed out and like 3 more after that, and I still, again, need more copies of the thing. After that, we have Fairy Tale Tenebria. Strong limited unit, not as good as she used to be. Accompanying artifact is Fairy Tale for a Nightmare. Not as strong as, say, Guiding Light, Elbrus, or Golden Rose, or the next one we're going to talk about. It's definitely one of the lower ones here on the list, but it is a very, very strong artifact in the hands of certain characters like, say, Solitary of the Snow and a couple of other mages, and they all want it at plus 30. So, again, having multiple copies of this thing at high investment level, very, very good for your account. And then finally, Ravi, who her accompanying artifact is Sigurdsey. Not as good as Golden Rose is currently on all the characters, but certain characters want Sigurd's a little bit more. And again, just like with Elbrus, Guiding Light, Golden Rose, you just can't have enough of this thing. I have like 3 or 4 of them, and I still feel like I need like another 2 or 3 copies. Limited heroes. Diane, in my opinion, is probably the best one of this entire batch, and that is because she's kind of evergreen. She kind of comes and goes in formats. She's either super good, kind of niche in PvP, or she's just very, very strong in PvE. I think just in general, for most players, you will get the most amount of mileage out of Diane, and her artifact, Unfading Memories, is pretty good on Soul Weavers if you happen to get one at a pretty high investment level. Holiday Euphine is basically only really played as an anti-cleave specialist. Her accompanying artifact, Champion's Trophy, pretty decent on a character like Conqueror Lotus, but not really used too much elsewhere. Landy, I think, is the second best overall choice here. for newer players because just like Diane, pretty evergreen character, great in a lot of PvE content, pretty good in PvP. It kind of depends on the meta. Sometimes she's top tier. Right now, she's kind of like a niche pick, and then sometimes she's just unplayable. But again, this character always comes and goes, so you're going to want to have her. Luna, waifu as hell, but she's not particularly very, very great. Draco Play, her accompanying artifact, is probably like the third best warrior artifact in the game behind Golden Rose and Sigurd Scythe. Seaside Bologna, I think, is in a pretty rough spot. Lone Crescent Bologna, I think, is just a better choice in PvP most of the time if you have access to her. And then overall in PvE, I think that there are comparable or better options than Seaside Bologna for less investment. And then her exclusive artifact, not really worth it anymore, at least in my opinion, only really on SSB herself here. Summer Break Charlotte, great cleave character, great artifact as well, mature sunglasses. Not as good as Elbrus Ritual Sword, Aureus, or even like Holy Sack, but it's pretty up there. It's pretty high tier knight artifact, so having a couple copies of it couldn't actually hurt. Summertime Assyria, I think, is pretty mid in my opinion, but for bomb-based strategies, you do need her artifact, Star of the Deep Sea, which is why I still recommend picking her up, especially if you're a Pirate Captain Flam player or someone who wants to play that character. Next up, we have Broken characters you should own. Pretty self-explanatory. If you just don't own these characters, they're just generically strong, even though they're not limited. Destina, great cleanser, great reviver, just good in all forms of content in the game. Issaria, one of the PvE gods, or goddesses, I should say, just amazing in hunts, raids, abyss, you name it. She's pretty much there with her best friend Tamarin. Lua, best PvP character in the game. Pera, one of the best PvP characters in the game. Very good for all playstyles, just fast, good for control. Actually can double as a tank. Just super useful character, just has a high gear investment. Politis, staple PvP unit, although terrible accompanying artifact. Ran is one of the best aggressive PvP characters in the game, also has some PvE applications. Requires insane gear to really bring out the Moso, but still just broken character. Speaking of broken characters, Rowana, just universally useful everywhere in the entire game, but her accompanying artifact, Touch of Rekos, pretty mid, which is why I can't just put her in her own tier. Speaking of characters that probably should be in their own tier, Tamarin, best PvE character in the game. Every single Epic 7 player needs this character. If you don't have her, she's probably the best choice overall. Next up is Whale Artifacts. These are basically, as the name implies, characters you choose because you need their artifact at plus 30. Senya is an amazingly strong character in Epic 7, but she doesn't work without her own artifact, and you need it at high investment level. So if you want to play Senya at all, you like this character's design, highly recommend that you pick this character and try to get as many copies as possible as her artifact. Celine is a bit niche, but her accompanying artifact, Storm Sword, is very, very strong for not only herself, but her ML counterpart and several other thieves that use it as a tech choice, but only really works at plus 24 or higher. So you need to have multiple copies of it. So if you don't have Storm Sword and you're looking for a strong thief artifact, then you definitely want to make sure that you pick this character and get multiple copies of the artifact. And then finally, we have Crow. Crow's best artifact is actually Aureus, but his accompanying artifact is Holy Sacrifice, which isn't really viable unless you have it at plus 27. But ideally, you really want it at plus 30, and it's a 5-star. It's pretty much the best option right now, I believe, on Abyssal Euphine. So if you're looking for that character, you're looking to play that character, then Crow is probably one to pick up to try to max out that artifact. Next tier is playables or good artifacts or somehow both. So let's quickly break it down. Alencia is pretty mid with a pretty okay artifact overall. Arya is a good character, that even if she's a bit niche, with a very niche artifact. Arunka is niche with a terrible artifact. Bihu is very good, but his artifact is not particularly great. Cecilia has kind of been replaced with Brieg, but if you're looking for a strong overall PvE character and don't have Brieg, Cecilia could be that for you. Her accompanying artifact, Rise of a Monarch, is pretty good in a lot of PvE content. Chloe is kind of trash, but is a high-valued imprint, and her artifact, A Little Queen's Huge Crown, is used in certain aggressive strategies, also pretty decent with a character like Arunka. Shu is just a pretty good Guild War unit overall, and her artifact, Snow Crystal, pretty good as well, especially on characters like Holiday Euphine. Command Model Laika, good in PvE, pretty good as an opener also in PvP. Her artifact, though, is pretty terrible. Elena, pretty good artifact, pretty good character as well, although she is a bit niche. Elagos is a pretty strong PvP character right now, but his artifact is garbage. Flan is just a dedicated cleave character who has some very, very minor PvE applications like the Advent that is up now as of the recording of this video. Ilanav is very difficult to use, but still pretty good PvP character. Could be used in Guild Wars a lot. Could potentially be used in Arena. Very niche in RTA. Her accompanying artifact's terrible. Kuerik is kind of a high gear investment, aggressive character, but his artifact is actually quite good for people who don't have very, very good gear. It can basically help supplement your lack of damage or critical hit chance on mages, which is pretty good. Charon, anti-cleave specialist, but his artifact is actually really, really insane. I didn't want to put it in goated artifacts because there's not that many characters that can use Shepherd of the Hollow, but the ones that want it, really want it, like Remnant Violet or Savior Auden, those are pretty much like the only two that really want the thing. Ken, great in PvE now with his new exclusive equipment as well as Ancient Inheritance. Accompanying artifact, Samsara Prayer Beads, also pretty decent. Kisei, pretty decent character. Alabastron finally actually has some PvE uses as well, although it's, again, incredibly niche. Lilius, pretty decent character overall in every single game mode. And then her artifact, Bastion of Perlucia, also kind of decent as well, especially after the buffs. Ludwig, Cleave Specialist, his accompanying artifact is Time Matter, very, very strong for PvP and PvE. Mort is a character that's pretty niche, and his artifact is also niche, but still playable. Mui, not super great, but her artifact is actually pretty useful on a number of control warriors, such as like Conqueror or Lilius. Pavel is a cleave character if you have really high gear. Otherwise, he is a great hunt character. His artifact that he accompanies him with is okay if you can get it at high investment levels. Ray is only really used for Nightmare Raid, but his accompanying artifact, Doctor's Bag, is pretty good for Moon Bunny Dominio. Sharoon is a playable character in PvP that's kind of decent as a counterpick. Her artifact is terrible. Tenebria, as we've already talked about in the last video, great in PvE. And then her artifact is decent if you can get high investment on it as kind of like a tech pick. If book ever gets changed, though, in such a way where it's nerfed or they remove it from the game, then Tenebria's artifact becomes a slam dunk on a lot of different characters. Tywin, great specialist for protection in certain scenarios. And then Crown of Glory is also a pretty decent artifact overall. Villager, as we talked about, great character. And then his accompanying artifact is also really great for him. And even a character like Rand, so if you're an aggressive player, pretty good pickup. Violet, just staple, anti-blue character in PvP. Accompanying artifact is okay, but it's not the best, in my opinion. Euphine, not super great, but her accompanying artifact, Merciless Glutton, is very, very good for aggressive warriors. Yulha, very good tank, but her artifact tanks her value because Sphere of Sadism is pretty bad. And then Zahak is pretty decent, but again, his artifact tanks his value because Pure White Trust is just a trash artifact. And then finally, we have down here, Only If Nothing Else. This is basically everybody else that is not super great. Of these here, Ball and Cezanne, pretty decent for Expo, but trash artifact. Bologna, I know people say I'm pretty harsh on there, but I just think there are better options in a lot of scenarios. That's just my personal opinion. So I don't particularly like her as a playable. Her recommended artifact's pretty bad. Edda is definitely a playable character, but just like with other characters, the artifact really tanks the value. And I don't particularly think she's as good as somebody like Zahak or Yulha. It's very hard for me to recommend Edda unless you want like the character, and then you already own Solitary of the Snow and need extra copies of her for imprints. Because if you're rolling on a custom group summon, you're probably going to be dumping like 2 pities worth of rolls into the banner for the most part. So it's just hard for me to recommend somebody who doesn't have good value in terms of dupes. That's why I have this here. Hua Young has a pretty good artifact, but it's only really used on one character, which is Infernal Kawazu, and he now has other options that he could choose, which is why I think the value is a bit lower here. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So if I forgot anything, missed anything, or you have any questions, let me know down in the comments below, or hit me up on Discord, which will be linked in this video's description. Speaking of things I'll link in this video's description, I will link my hour plus long or so rants on the RGB 5 stars, as well as all of the 5-star artifacts that I did with Divine Shadow a couple of months back over the summer. They should mostly still hold up. I kind of break down every single use case for artifacts and for characters. So again, if you want a more long form explanation, if you're newer, don't really understand the intricacies of every character, Those will be linked down in the video's description, or they should appear on your screen now. As always, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week. Catch you in the next one. Bye-bye now.